Hello friends, the topic for today is generic web application architecture. In this video, I will give introduction of web application architecture and discuss what is an architecture, properties of software architecture, different factors and constraints influencing the development of an architecture, and components of a generic web application architecture. Let us start with the introduction. Web application architecture is a pattern of interaction between the web application components. The way this interaction is planned out determines the resilience, performance, and security of a future web application. The quality of web application is considerably influenced by its underlying architecture. Incomplete or misarchitectural aspects make it difficult to realize the quality requirements of web applications or even make it totally impossible to meet them. Poor performance, insufficient maintainability and expandability, and low availability of web applications are often caused by an inappropriate architecture. In addition to technical constraints like available web servers, application servers used, or the integration of legacy systems, the architectures of web applications should also consider the organizational framework in which they are embedded. For example, architect's experience. The use of flexible multi-layer architectures, the consideration of multimedia contents, and the integration of existing data repositories and applications are challenges in the development of successful architectures of web applications. When developing web applications, we have to consider a large number of requirements and constraints ranging from functional requirements such as online product orders, over quality requirements such as performance or availability, to the integration of existing software systems, so-called legacy systems, or existing data repositories that our web application should read. Also, web applications are normally not developed from scratch as far as the technical infrastructure is concerned. Instead, we often have to extend or adapt an existing infrastructure. Besides pure technical constraints, we can identify other criteria such as economic viability of a technical infrastructure. The architecture of a web application should be designed in such a way that it can best meet these requirements. Now let us see what is an architecture. There is no unique definition of the term architecture. We try to describe the most important properties of software architectures. First property, architecture describes structure. According to Bass and others, the architecture of software system consists of its structures, the decomposition into components, and their interfaces and relationship. It describes both static and dynamic aspect of that software systems so that it can be considered a building design and flowchart for software product. The next property, architectures form the transition from analysis to implementation. When we create architecture, we try to break the functional requirements and quality requirements down into software components and their relationship and interfaces in an iterative approach. This process is supported by a number of approaches such as the unified process. The next property, architecture can be looked at from different viewpoints. Depending on the point of view from which the architecture is seen, we can emphasize and itemize different architectural aspects. We normally distinguish between four different views. First view, the conceptual view, which identifies entities of the application domain and their relationship. Then second, the runtime view, which describes the components at a system runtime, for example, servers or communication connections. Then third, the process view, which maps processes at system runtime while looking at aspects like synchronization and concurrency. Then fourth view, the implementation view, which describes the system's software artifacts, for example, subsystems, components, or source code. This differentiation into different viewpoints is also supported by modeling languages, for example, the Unified Modeling Language, UML. The next property, architecture makes a system understandable. Structuring software systems and breaking them down into different perspectives allows us to better manage the complexity of software systems and the systems become easier to understand. In addition, the abstraction of system aspect facilitates the communication of important architectural issues. The next property, architecture represents the framework for a flexible system. Tom DeMarco refers to architecture as a framework of change. That is, the software architecture forms the framework in which a software system can evolve. If extensions of a system have not been accounted for in advance, then such an extension will be at best be difficult to realize. Considering the above properties of architectures, we can easily see that the architectural decisions are of enormous importance for the development of web applications. Then let us go to the developing architectures. The requirements of software and thus its architecture are subject to change. Technical and organizational constraints change during and after the development of an application. This may be due to unclear requirements at the beginning of the development process or a change of requirements after the system's completion. This is the reason why software systems are often referred to as moving targets. Figure shows the different factors and constraints influencing the development of an architecture according to Jacobson and others, 1999. The architecture of an application is primarily influenced by functional requirements which depends on clients, users and other stakeholders. Quality considerations such as scalability, performance, reusability, etc. Architectures are further influenced by technical constraints such as operating systems, middleware, legacy systems to be integrated, and standards use, etc. Experience with existing architecture, patterns, and project management, etc. Let us see the details. The architecture of an application is primarily influenced by functional requirements, that is, the services provided by a system, and the quality considerations such as scalability or performance. Apart from these requirements, architectures are further influenced by technical constraints such as the use system software, for example the operating system, the middleware, for example the CORBA implementation, legacy systems to be integrated, standards use, development rules, for example coding guidelines, or distribution aspect, for example the distribution over different locations of a company. Moreover, the software architect experience play a considerable role in the definition of an architecture. Then let us go to the components of a generic web architecture. Figure shows the basic components of a web architecture and their relationship. Here we have shown main components of a web architecture, client and web server in the shaded form, and optional components of the web architecture such as database server, application server, media server, content management server, and legacy applications, proxy and firewall with dotted lines. Communication between these components is generally based on the request response principle. That is, one component sends a request to another component. For example, web browser sends a request to the web server and the response to this request is sent back over the same communication channel. That is why it is called as the synchronous communication. The following list briefly describes each of these components. First is client. A client is a user-friendly representation of web apps functionality that a user interacts with. Written in HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, it exists within the user's web browser and doesn't need any specific operating system or device-related adjustments. Generally, a web browser, that is user agent, is controlled by a user to operate the web application. The client's functionality can be expanded by installing plugins and applets. Then next is firewall, a piece of software regulating the communication between insecure networks, for example the internet, and the secure networks, for example corporate local area networks. This communication is filtered by access rules. Then next is proxy. Proxy is typically used to temporarily store web pages in a cache memory. However, proxies can also assume other functionalities, for example adapting the contents for users, that is customization or user tracking. Then next is web server. A web server is a piece of software that supports various web protocols like HTTP and HTTPS, that is secure HTTP, etc. to process client's request. Then database server. This server normally supplies an organization's production data in structured form, for example in tables. Then media server. This component is primarily used for content streaming of non-structured bulk data, for example audio or video, that is multimedia. Then content management server. Similar to database server, a content management server holds content to serve an application. These contents are normally available in the form of semi-structured data, for example XML documents. Then application server. An application server holds the functionality required by several applications, for example workflow or customization. Then last, legacy application. A legacy application is an older system that should be integrated as an internal or external component in the web application. So these are the different components of a web application architecture. With this, we come to the end of this video. Like the video, press the like button, share with your friends with the help of this icon, and subscribe to our channel Engineering and Technology for You. And don't forget to press the bell icon so that you get notifications for our future videos on this topic. Then thanks for watching. Have a nice day.